Oh, there's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello, BookTube. I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel and to another episode of Another Words, which is an occasional series where I talk about words and stuff that I find in my reading and look stuff up, etymology and whatnot, online and present what I find. I am not a pro, definitely not, but I have fun doing this. Also, this I think is this might be the 40th episode. I think it is, or maybe it's the 39th. We're not going to have a party or anything, but I have done about 40 of these. So it's kind of hard to find them because YouTube search sucks. So I have a playlist. It's linked in the show notes if you want to OD on them. Let's get started. I have 6 pieces of vocabulary from maybe 3 or 4 books. And the first book is one that I often dip into because it's like 3,000 pages or something. I've been reading it forever. Clarissa, 1748 novel by Samuel Richardson. And the one today is slight, a verb we still use quite a bit in modern times. And the sentence is, I am sure he has no reason, however, to slight me as he does. So, slight meaning to treat with indifference, to treat rudely. And that verb has been around in English since 1300, and the original meaning of the verb was to make plain or smooth. The second meaning, the one that we use today, to treat with indifference, came from the late 16th century. So why to make plain or smooth? The adjective slight, around the same time, early 14th century, it meant flat, smooth, or hairless. They trace it back to Old Norse, a word that meant the same, and they found versions of this in Proto-Germanic, Old Saxon, and Old English, and so on, Old Frisian, Middle Dutch, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now this is interesting. They say it probably goes back to a Proto-Indo-European root that looks very much like the word. Here it is, slay, which meant to smooth, to glide, be muddy, and that went back to a root that's also very similar, which meant slimy. We're going to talk about slimy in a minute. So, the way I understand it is the etymological consensus is that the sense of slight started with the idea of smooth and then kind of shifted more to slim, slender, of light texture, which then got more of a metaphorical meaning of not good or strong, insubstantial, trifling, and we use that adjectival meaning a slight increase, a slight decrease, small in amount. Okay, that makes sense. And then, so why to be treated with indifference? So if you think about it as being a small thing, not good or strong, if you're treated like crap, you're treated like you're in a small or inferior thing. So that is the idea of slighting someone, or it also exists as a noun. A slight is treating someone as if they're not worth anything, or treating them kind of rudely, snobbishly, contemptuously. Slight. So what's this about slime? So again, they think it probably goes back to this Proto-Indo-European root slay, and it comes from the other root slay, which means slimy. So let's look at slimy. We'll start from the English word slime and go work our way back. The word slime apparently came into English in the 1620s from the noun meaning, and the noun meaning comes from Old English, Proto-Germanic, Old Norse, Frisian, all those same ones. And it goes back to the Proto-Indo-European root, as we said, slay, which meant slimy, sticky, slippery. That Proto-Indo-European root is also the source of words with similar meanings in Sanskrit, Russian, Old Church Slavonic, a language I didn't know existed until this moment, Old Irish, Welsh, Greek, Latin. The Latin word was limus, meaning slime, mud, mire. The idea of a slime, the noun form, meaning an insult to a person, comes from the mid-15th century. I'm making connections in my mind that the etymological evidence does not bear out, because to slime someone and to slate someone, you could see that there's a difference in degree, and they're not exactly the same, but to make a connection between them, but that's not the connection that's here. The connection that's here is smooth, which was the original meaning of slight. Goes back to that slay Proto-Indo-European, which meant to smooth, to glide, to be muddy. And so it's that muddy thing that goes back to the root that's the great-great-grandfather of the word slime. So it's a distant cousin, but it's very interesting. And one last thought on that is the word delete is a distant cousin as well. Delete. And it goes back to a Latin word, delevi, which meant to daub or erase by smudging. And that is from the prefix de, and the word linear, which meant to smear and wipe, which goes back to slime. Smear and slime. Okay. I have two from this, one of the best short story collections I've read this year. From India, No Presents Please, by Jayant Kaikini, translated from the Kannada language by Tejaswini Niranjana. I loved this collection, and these are not Indian-specific words, but the first one is decoction. So I'd never heard of decoction, but if you think about that word for a minute, it probably reminds you of other words. Decoction. The word that it reminded me of, and it is very closely related to the word concoction, which was quite a somewhat common word. Decoction is the noun meaning is a concentrated liquor resulting from heating or boiling a substance, especially a medicinal preparation made from a plant. So a decoction from a root. It's a process of extraction, boiling herbal or plant material to dissolve the chemicals. Might be the stems, the roots, the bark. You mash the vegetative material and then boil and extract the oils and all that stuff, okay? Decoction. And it's also the noun meaning the resultant liquid. And decoct is that action or process. Not a word that I probably had ever heard of before, but easy to understand. Decoction entered the English language in the late 14th century, and it goes back to Old French, going back to Latin, a word decoctionem, which meant a boiling down, and there was a Latin verb which had the same meaning, and that goes back to, that can be broken down to the prefix de, and then cocere, or cocere, which meant to cook in Latin, and they can trace it right back to the Proto-Indo-European root, which I don't know how to pronounce. There's probably no pronunciation. Pekw, here it is, which means to cook or to ripen. So the prefix de is pretty common prefix in English, and in many of the verbs that come to us through French, it means down from, concerning. That's what it means here. And then the Proto-Indo-European root, pekw, I just think it's fascinating. Here are a whole bunch of other words in English that come from that same Proto-Indo-European root. And I can hear the idea of cooking or boiling down in most of them. Of course, concoction, apricot, biscuit, charcuterie. I don't know how you pronounce that in English or French, but I'm going to say charcuterie. Cook, cuisine, culinary, dyspepsia, kiln, kitchen, peptide, precocious, not cooked enough, is that what that means? Pumpkin, ricotta, and terracotta. That's fascinating. The next word is iota. Again, not an Indian word, but it's in this story. I know what iota means. It means a very, very tiny amount of something, a tiny quantity or amount. There had been no iota of shame in his mother and himself when they stood on blinking, watching his father fall from the train like an animal which had been flung out. Wow, that's a very dramatic sentence. So not even a little bit of shame. So I didn't know any of this. Why does iota mean what it does? A very small amount. It came into English in the 1630s, and it's a figurative use of the word iota, which actually meant, and Probably most of you knew this before, but it was all new to me. It meant the ninth and smallest letter in the Greek alphabet. And I'll put it up there. I think I can find the Greek character. And I don't know why one character would be smaller or larger than another, but I don't understand anything about the Greek alphabet. And there is a verse in the Bible, in Matthew 5, verse 18. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. When they translated it into English, it was jot and tittle. But actually, in the Greek Bible, I'm getting out of my depth here, it was iota and corella. So, iota, smallest letter of the Greek alphabet. Because of all of that, it's etymologically connected to the word jot. So we'll talk about jot in a minute. Iota in classical Greek also had that proverbial meaning of anything that was small. And it also corresponds to the 10th and smallest letter of Hebrew, which was called yod, which is, again, connected to jot and iota. What is a tittle, you ask? It's a superscript dot, like the one over a small I or a small j. That's a tittle. Are you feeling titillated? No connection, by the way. So yes, in fact, jot, the verb jot, to jot something down, is to make a small note. So it's connected. I won't go down any more of that rabbit hole, but they're all one big family of words that come to us through the Greek language that have come to mean something really small. And one from this biography of the royal sisters, Elizabeth and Margaret. The Intimate World of the Windsor Sisters by Andrew Morton. It was oops, I keep putting my hand over Margaret's beautiful face. It was a so-so biography of a fascinating pair of sisters in modern history, and I'm obsessed with both of them, but probably especially Margaret. So the word here is irascible. Which royal personage do you think that it describes in this book? Princess Margaret? My vote is Prince Philip. Let's see, it's on page 5. But the etymology of irascible, we all know, right? It means very easily angered. Oh, maybe, actually, one of the things I learned from this book is what a terrible temper their father, King George VI, had. So maybe it's him. I was one generation wrong. It was the grandfather. It was their grandfather, King George V. He is described as irascible, but certainly their father was too. So, irascible. Interesting in terms of the nuances of the various word. Irascible means quicker and more intense bursts of anger than the word irritable, which I can feel the difference, and I would choose those words. Certainly irritable would be weaker, but I didn't really understand that irascible was stronger. So irascible came into English in the late 14th century from the Old French word, which was spelled exactly the same way, but presumably, I think my terrible French still enables me to pronounce it irascible. And then going back to a very similar looking word in Latin, here it is. And going back to another Latin word, ira, from which we get the word ire. So irascible and ire are very much connected. They both descended from this Latin word ira, but they had different variations in all the languages that they entered. So, for example, ire came into English about a century, almost 2 centuries earlier from Old French, and the word in French was the same spelling, ire, anger, wrath, violence, going back to that Latin ira. And the Latin ira, so sometimes this online etymology dictionary doesn't delineate things as clearly as I would like. It's rare for me to find one where I don't think they made all the connections, but in this case I think I'm right to say that they didn't make the connection with irascible that they did with ire, because ira, the Latin ira, anger, wrath, rage, and passion, goes back to the Proto-Indo-European root, here it is, ice, which forms various words denoting passion. But in the irascible entry, they go all the way back to ira, but then they just say see ire. So, yeah. So, in fact, irascible goes back to this Proto-Indo-European root. And there are words in Greek and Sanskrit and Lithuanian, all of which have this idea of passion or anger. So here are a few others that are connected. So I want to be really careful here because we have a bunch of words that come from that Proto-Indo-European root. But the ones that came through Greek, if I'm understanding this correctly, they tended to relate to the Greek word hieros, which was filled with the divine or holy. So that's a type of passion, but it's not about anger. For example, hierarchy, hieroglyphic, hierophant. The only other one that really is connected to irascible that we also use is irate. So irascible, and irate are all very closely related. The next one is from an Australian novel from the 1960s that I bailed on fairly. Well, I read about 40%, but I didn't like it. I thought it was really quite pretentious. But some of my bookish besties love this writer, so I will give her another try. This is A Descant for Gossips by Thea, Astley. And the word in here, and I don't have the book anymore, is aplomb. And it's a self-confidence. It's a really appealing self-confidence. Somebody does something with assurance. Okay, but why? The first incident of the word aplomb in English was from 1828. It goes back to the French aplomb, meaning self-possession, or literally perpendicularity. In French, there was a phrase, 2 words, aplomb, meaning poised, upright, balanced. So there's a sense of standing up tall to show confidence. It carried into English. And that phrase, aplomb, like I say, it meant poised or upright, but literally the meaning was on the plumb line. So what the heck is a plumb line? There's a lot of references to the plumb line in the Bible. That's why I'm not that familiar with it. It denotes a standard of justice and righteousness. Amos pleaded with God to relent his judgment, and in their place, and then God produces a plumb line. So a plumb line is a weight suspended from a string, used as a vertical reference line to ensure a structure is centered, and it ends up becoming an image of a balanced Christian life. So we won't worry about that. But this idea of perpendicularity and balance and confidence all connected up together. So the word plumb, like I say, it entered English in the late 14th century, and it meant that metal lead. And it goes back to Old French and late Latin, all of which has the same meaning. And the word plumber also relates to this idea of this metal lead. And I'm not going to go down a rabbit hole for that, but there is a clear connection between the plumb line and a plumber. Because the Latin word, this metal lead, also meant pipe. So, I'm looking for a plumber that can fix my pipes with a plumb. And finally, from one of the best books I've read this year, Elizabeth Jane Howard's debut novel, The Beautiful Visit, which was originally published in 1950. I have a full review of this, which I will put a link to in the show notes. But the phrase is to write a Collins. Let me read you the quote here. "It's no use," said Lucy's mother. "Every year when you go away, I resolve never to have you again, and then you write me such an enchanting Collins that I find it impossible to deprive myself of the chance of another." The idiomatic expression is to write a Collins. To write a Collins is to write a letter of thank you for hospitality, sent by a guest who has departed someone's house. It's a dead art, don't you think? There might be to email a Collins, but why do they call it that? There was a character in Pride and Prejudice. So this goes back to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Mr. William Collins, do you remember him? I don't. He was the vicar of Hunsford, Mr. Bennet's cousin, and he stayed at Mr. Bennet's estate, Longbourn, for a week. He went on to successively, not successfully, I do remember this part, not successfully, but successively propose to Elizabeth Bennet, then to Elizabeth's friend Charlotte Lucas. Oh, I believe that Charlotte Lucas did accept. Okay. And then he wrote a thank you letter after his visit. So let's listen to this quote. The promised letter of thanks from Mr. Collins arrived on Tuesday, addressed to their father, and written with all the solemnity of gratitude which a 12 months' abode in the family might have prompted. After discharging his conscience on that head, he proceeded to inform them, with many rapturous expressions, of his happiness in having obtained the affection of their amiable neighbour, Miss Lucas, and so on. So that gave rise to this expression to write Collins. It seems kind of strange that it did, but it did. So to write Collins. There is an American English equivalent of this thank you letter after being put up by friends to thank somebody for the hospitality of having put you up at their home. And it's called a bread and butter letter. And we have to go back to there's a columnist called Mrs. Lyman Abbott in the Ladies' Home Journal in Philadelphia, 1894, who explains the origin of that phrase. The bread and butter letter, as it is sometimes called, because it is supposed to be an expression of thanks for what bread and butter stands for, should be written within 24 hours after arrival at one's destination, to the hostess, whose hospitality one has been enjoying. And it goes on. Somebody from the fabulous mother-daughter booktube duo of Roz of Scallydandling About the Books, or Tilly of Tilly's Shelf, might have more information about this. That's all I found. So, I'm curious, do people still say write a Collins? Other than Tilly and Roz, do normal, non-bookish people still use the phrase in the UK? I'm very curious. Well, that's all I got. Thanks for watching.